She burned the letter, not from rage, from the cold, deliberate decision of a woman who had already made up her mind. Charlotte Whitmore fed her father's debt notice into the fireplace, watched $42,000 turn to ash, and said nothing. Behind her, her father was still talking, still explaining, still apologizing, and she let him. Because the moment she'd seen the name, Nathaniel Ashford, on that marriage contract, every word Edmund Whitmore would ever say to her had stopped mattering. Subscribe to our channel, stay until the very last word, and drop a comment. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Charlotte's story travels. The quill snapped in her hand. Charlotte looked down at the broken pieces, black ink bleeding across her fingers, across the white cuff of her sleeve, across the marriage contract that still needed her signature, and she made a choice. She set the broken quill down, picked up a second one from the desk drawer, dipped it, and signed her name in the clearest, steadiest hand she had ever written. If she was going to be sold, she would be sold with her spine straight. Charlotte. Her father's voice cracked on her name. Edmund Whitmore was a man who cried beautifully. She had always known that about him. The way his eyes went glassy at exactly the right moment. The way his voice roughened in a manner that made people want to comfort him, even when he was the one who'd caused the damage. Sweetheart, I need you to understand I had no other... How long? She asked. She didn't look up from the contract. What? How long have you been negotiating this arrangement? She smoothed the paper flat with one ink-stained hand. Weeks, months. Silence. Papa. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks. He had known for 3 weeks. He had sat across from her at supper, asked about her books and her sewing, and whether she'd heard about the Mercer girl's engagement, poured himself bourbon, and complained about the summer heat, and he had known for 3 weeks that he was going to sell her to the most hated man in Virginia. Charlotte finally looked at him. Edmund Whitmore flinched. $42,000, she said quietly. And you waited 3 weeks to tell me. I thought I might find another way. There was no other way. She stood. There hasn't been another way for 2 years, Papa. I've seen the ledgers. I know exactly what you owe and to whom and since when. I knew before you did that we were finished. She picked up the signed contract and set it on the edge of his desk facing him. The difference between us is that I didn't hide it. Edmund's face crumpled. Real grief this time. She could always tell the difference, even if it didn't change anything. I'm sorry, he whispered. Charlotte, I am so deeply... Take care of Thomas and William. She moved toward the door. Make sure William stays in school. Tell Mary the blue dress in the back of my wardrobe is hers. She paused with her hand on the door frame, didn't turn around. And don't drink more than 2 glasses tonight, Papa. The boys need you present in the morning. She walked out before he could answer. She didn't sleep. She sat at her writing desk from midnight to dawn with a fresh ledger open in front of her, and she worked. Not because there was anything left to calculate, she had known the numbers by heart for months, but because columns of figures were the only thing in the world that had never lied to her. Every number meant exactly what it said. Every error could be found and corrected. Every balance eventually resolved. She was going to marry Nathaniel Ashford. She wrote the name at the top of a clean page, let it sit there, stared at it. She had seen him once 3 summers ago, at a church social outside of Charlottesville. She'd noticed him the way you noticed a storm on the horizon, not because it was close yet, but because something in the quality of the air changed. He had stood at the edge of the gathering, apart from the other men, and the space around him had been deliberate people keeping their distance, the way they kept their distance from something they'd decided collectively to fear. Her cousin had grabbed her arm. Don't stare, Charlotte. Why not? You know why not. Everyone knows about him. Everyone did know. The story had been circulating for 5 years, since a political gathering in Richmond, where Nathaniel Ashford, the most promising young heir in Virginia, had been discovered in circumstances that polite company summarized in careful, devastating silence. The details were never spoken aloud. They didn't need to be. The silence itself was the verdict. He is not a natural man. His political career had ended the same week. He had retreated to Ashford Manor 12 miles out of town, and Virginia had closed around his absence like water over a stone. And now Charlotte was going to live in his house. She closed the ledger, pressed her palms flat on the cover, drew one slow breath. You have survived everything your father's weakness has made necessary, she told herself. You will survive this too. She added one line to the top of a fresh page, 2 columns the way her grandfather had taught her: known, unknown, underknown. The debt is real. The marriage is binding. My family survives if I go. Under unknown, everything else. She worked until the sky outside her window went from black to gray to the pale gold of a Virginia summer morning. Then she packed her trunk, pinned her hair, and went downstairs to meet the carriage that was already waiting. It was a fine carriage. That was the first thing that landed finer than anything the Whitmore family had owned in years: dark lacquered wood with brass fittings, 2 matched bays that were worth more than her father's entire remaining stable. The driver was a quiet older man, weathered and steady, who touched the brim of his hat when she appeared at the door. Miss Whitmore, I'm to take you to Ashford Manor, ma'am. Ma'am. As if she were already someone's wife. Her father stood at the top of the porch steps. He looked like a man who'd been awake all night rehearsing something to say and had arrived at morning with nothing. Her brothers were still inside. She'd asked them not to come out, and for once they'd listened. She didn't want their faces in this moment. She didn't want to carry that weight on top of everything else. Edmund came down the steps. Charlotte. Don't, she said, quietly, without cruelty. There's nothing to say, Papa. I need you to know that I know. She did. She believed that he was sorry, believed it completely, and it made no difference at all. Some sorrows were too late to be useful. Send word when William's school fees are settled. I want to know he's all right. She turned and stepped up into the carriage before he could reach for her. The door closed. The carriage rolled forward. She kept her eyes ahead past the old oak at the gate, past the stone wall her grandfather had laid by hand, past the bend in the road where the house disappeared from view, and she kept her chin up and her hands folded in her lap and told herself that the cold weight in her chest was armor. Just armor, that was all. Ashford Manor did not look like a cursed place. She had not let herself expect anything specific. That was a rule she'd learned young from watching her father's expectations ruin every good thing he'd ever had. But somewhere beneath the rule, she'd braced for something that matched the reputation. Something dark. Something that announced itself. What she found was a house that had been built to last. Wide stone facade, tall windows, a drive lined with oaks, old enough that their branches arched overhead and touched in the middle. The grounds were kept. The flower beds along the front walk were tended. Whoever lived here had not given up. She filed that away. A woman met her at the door, 40 or so, direct-eyed, with the bearing of someone who ran the household and had done so for long enough that she didn't need to announce it. Miss Whitmore, I'm Mrs. Hadley. I'll show you to your rooms. Mr. Ashford is expecting you for supper at 6. Is he in the house now? Charlotte asked. He is, ma'am. Then I'd like to see him now, before I see the rooms. Mrs. Hadley looked at her for a moment, not unfriendly, but measuring. Then she gave a short nod. I'll let him know. She waited in the front sitting room standing. She was too wound up to sit. She stood near the window and looked at nothing and told herself to breathe. The door opened. Nathaniel Ashford was taller than she remembered. 31 years old, with a face that had once probably been considered remarkable, and now carried the particular gravity of a man who had stopped caring whether the world found him appealing. Dark hair slightly longer than fashion preferred, a faint scar above his left eyebrow. He was dressed plainly, no performance, no excess, and he looked at her with the steady, unhurried attention of someone accustomed to being looked at with something far less generous. Miss Whitmore, he said, I'm glad you arrived safely. Mr. Ashford. She didn't wait. Before we go any further, I want to say something. He paused. All right. I'm here because my family had no other option. I understand that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, and I'm not going to make your life difficult in revenge for it. She kept her voice level, her eyes on his. I intend to fulfill whatever obligations come with this arrangement. I'm practical by nature, and I prefer to work rather than sit idle. I kept accounts for my father's household for 4 years, crop yields, expenditure, debt structure. I'm accurate and I'm thorough, and I'd rather be useful than decorative. A breath. That's all I wanted to say. Nathaniel Ashford looked at her for a long moment. I appreciate that, he said. And then, there's something I'd like to say in return if you'll hear it. She nodded once. He stepped forward, not close enough to crowd her, just close enough that his voice could drop without losing its weight. There are things said about me in this county. You've heard them. I won't pretend otherwise, and I won't insult you by asking you to simply disregard them. His jaw was set, but there was nothing defensive in his voice. Just the flat, careful delivery of a man who had learned to say true things in rooms full of people who didn't want to hear them. What I will tell you is this: whatever happens inside this house, whatever life we make here, you will not be under my authority in the way your father's contract implies. I will not force you. I will not harm you. I will not demand anything from you that you haven't freely chosen to give. Charlotte stared at him. You have my word, he said. For whatever it's worth to you right now. She had braced for cruelty. She had braced for cold efficiency, a man going through the motions of courtesy because it was cheaper than conflict. She had even braced for performance, the particular theater of a powerful man deciding to be gracious about claiming something he'd purchased. She had not braced for this. Why? The word came out before she could stop it. This arrangement, a wife, a household, if the rumors about you are... She stopped, steadied herself. Why go to the trouble? That's a fair question, he said, and I'll answer it, but not today. Something in his voice shifted, not softer exactly, but more honest. The way a door sounds when it opens a single inch after being sealed for years. Today you've traveled 12 miles and had a harder morning than that. See your rooms, rest. We'll talk properly at supper. It was, she realized, a reasonable thing to say. The most reasonable thing anyone had said to her in 3 days. All right, she said. All right, he echoed. And there it was, something she hadn't expected in his voice when he said it. Not relief exactly, something older than relief. Something that sounded like a man who had stopped expecting anything good and had just been quietly, unexpectedly surprised. Her rooms were in the east wing, second floor, a bedroom, and a small sitting room with windows that caught the afternoon light. The furniture was simple and well kept. Fresh summer roses in a small vase on the writing desk. A clean stack of paper. A good pen laid beside the inkwell. Charlotte stood in the middle of the room and went very still. He had known she kept accounts. Someone had told him, or he had made it his business to find out, and he had put a writing desk in her room, with paper and a fresh pen already waiting. She didn't know what to do with that. She wasn't ready to do anything with that. So she unpacked her trunk the way she always processed things she wasn't ready for, methodically, deliberately, one item at a time. Dresses in the wardrobe, books on the shelf, her mother's miniature portrait on the windowsill where the morning light would find it. Then she sat at the desk, smoothed a fresh page in front of her, and added to her 2 columns. Under known, she wrote, he put a writing desk in my room. She stared at it for a moment. Then she underlined it, twice. Supper was the 2 of them at one end of a table built for 20. The servants moved quietly between them. The candles burned low. Outside, the summer dark had settled over the fields, and somewhere in the oaks along the drive, an owl had started up. For the first several minutes they ate in silence. Not hostile, not comfortable either. The silence of 2 people who hadn't yet found the right opening and were each separately too careful to force one. Then, Nathaniel set down his fork. You said you tracked crop yields, he said. How far back? 3 seasons, Charlotte said. Before my father let the overseer go and tried to manage it himself. I could see the margins deteriorating in the 2nd year. I flagged it twice. She paused. He didn't listen. Men rarely do, Nathaniel said, when the person flagging the problem is someone they've decided not to take seriously. Charlotte looked up. There was nothing pointed in his expression. He wasn't making a speech. He said it the way he seemed to say most things flatly, as observable fact, and then picked up his fork again. My grandfather taught me, she said after a moment. He said the Whitmore women had better sense with money than the Whitmore men. He gave me his ledgers when I was 12 and told me to find his errors. And did you? 17, she said. He'd been carrying a wrong forward in his timber accounts for 6 years. It had compounded. She paused. He was delighted. He made me do it again with the following year's books. Something shifted in Nathaniel's face. It was brief, barely a flicker, but it was unmistakably warm. 17 tomes. He was a brilliant man, Charlotte said. Careless with carry-forwards, but brilliant. The flicker became for just a moment something close to a smile. The silence that fell after that was different. Not the careful silence of two strangers at a table too large for them. Something else. The quiet of two people who had without quite planning to found a small piece of common ground and were standing on it testing its weight. You asked me this afternoon why I arranged this marriage, Nathaniel said. Charlotte set down her fork. The practical answer is this. His voice was even measured the voice of a man who had rehearsed honesty because he'd learned that performance cost more. A man with my reputation cannot conduct certain business, cannot hold property in certain arrangements, cannot maintain the kind of household that keeps men like Victor Langley from finding new ways to pick at what's left. He paused. The name Langley had a weight to it, she noticed, a specific, deliberate weight. A wife who is present, credible, and capable removes several of those vulnerabilities. And the other answer, Charlotte said, you said the practical answer, which means there's another one. He was quiet for a moment. I was told, he said carefully, that your family's situation was desperate, and that your father would agree to terms that protected you. That whoever you were given to would determine what kind of life you had. He met her eyes directly. I made inquiries. I was told you were capable and honest, and that you deserved better than what you were likely to get. A pause. I can offer better. So I did. The room went very quiet. Charlotte looked at the man across the table. This man that all of Virginia had decided to discard. This man who sat alone in a house built for a family, and ate supper in silence, and had apparently spent 3 weeks investigating the daughter of a bankrupt farmer to make sure she wouldn't be mistreated. And she felt something shift in the architecture of her certainty. Not trust, not yet, not anything she was ready to name, but something. That is, she said slowly, the strangest and most decent thing I have ever heard a man say. I'm aware it doesn't look decent from the outside. No, she agreed. From the outside, it looks like a transaction. Yes. But it wasn't. He held her gaze. No. She picked up her wine glass, turned it once in her hand. Mr. Ashford, what did Victor Langley do to you? The warmth that had been building in his expression went still. Not hostile, carefully, deliberately still. The stillness of a man closing a door he'd opened 1/4 of an inch without slamming it. That, he said quietly, is a conversation for another evening. Charlotte nodded. She had expected that. She had asked anyway because she needed to know how he handled a question he wasn't ready to answer, whether he deflected or lied, or simply closed down. He had closed down, cleanly, without cruelty, and he had told her it was for another evening, not never, which meant he intended to answer it eventually. She filed that away in her left-hand column. Known. That night she lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of a house she didn't know yet. The creak of the floors settling in the heat. The wind moving through the oaks. The owl still at it somewhere in the dark. She thought about what he'd said. I was told you were capable and honest. He had chosen her, deliberately. Not from the nearest desperate family, not from convenience. He had made inquiries, which meant he had asked questions, which meant he had cared about the answer before he'd even met her. She thought about the writing desk, the paper, the pen, already waiting. She thought about 17 errors, and the way his face had done that almost thing, that almost smile, and how it had looked like a man who had forgotten for a moment that he wasn't supposed to be surprised by the world anymore. She thought about Victor Langley, and the weight of that name, and the way Nathaniel's stillness had changed when she'd said it. There was a story there, a large one, a dangerous one maybe. Charlotte stared at the ceiling in the dark. Capable and honest, he'd said. She reached over to the writing desk without getting up, found the page she'd started that afternoon, by feel, and added one line to the left-hand column. He is not what they say he is. She capped the ink. Lay back down." Outside, the Virginia summer night pressed warm and dark against the windows, and somewhere in the house 12 miles from everything she'd ever known, in a life she had not chosen and could not yet read, Charlotte Whitmore closed her eyes. She did not feel safe. But for the first time in 3 days, she did not feel afraid. And in the accounting of her life, that was enough to begin with. She found the first lie on a Wednesday morning. Not a dramatic discovery, no locked door, no hidden compartment, no midnight confession. Just Charlotte at the household ledger 3 days into her new life at Ashford Manor, running her finger down a column of expenditures that didn't add up the way they should have. $40 marked as agricultural supply. Repeated monthly. Consistent. Unremarkable if you weren't the kind of person who noticed that Ashford Manor had no active farming operation large enough to require $40 in supply costs every single month without variation. Not 38, not 42. 40. Exactly. Every time. Charlotte set down her pen. Nobody spent exactly $40 on agricultural supply every month. Costs fluctuated. Weather changed. Needs varied. The only time a number stayed perfectly consistent was when it wasn't what it claimed to be. She closed the ledger, placed it precisely where she'd found it, and went to breakfast as though she hadn't seen a thing. Because she had learned in 4 years of managing her father's deteriorating finances that the most important skill in accounting wasn't finding the error. It was knowing when to stay quiet about what you'd found until you understood what it meant. Nathaniel was already at the table when she came down. He stood when she entered. She had noticed he always did that. Always rose when she came into a room, with the automatic courtesy of a man who had been raised with manners so deep they'd survived even his exile from the society that had taught them to him. He poured her coffee without being asked. He had noticed in 3 days that she took it with 1 spoon of sugar and no cream. He had not commented on it. He had simply started having it ready. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." She sat, reached for the coffee. "I'd like to ask you something." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "All right." "The $40 agricultural supply line in the household ledger," she said. "What is it actually for?" The cup came down. Not quickly. Not the sharp movement of a man caught out, but with the deliberate care of someone who needed a half second to decide something. His eyes met hers directly. "You've been through the ledgers." "You gave me access to the ledgers," she said. "I assumed that was intentional." A pause. Something moved across his face, not guilt, not quite. More like the expression of a man revising his estimate of a situation upward. "It was," he said. "I didn't expect you to get that far in 3 days. I read quickly." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "You don't have to tell me what it's for. It's your household and your money. But if you want me to keep accounts accurately, I need to know what I'm actually looking at." Nathaniel set his cup down, looked at the table for a moment. Then, "It goes to a school," he said. "In town, for children whose families can't afford the fee." He said it the way people admitted things they were not ashamed of, but had learned to keep private flatly without decoration. The headmaster records it as supply costs on his end as well, so it doesn't appear in the school's charity rolls. Some of the families would pull their children out if they knew someone was paying. Charlotte stared at him. "There are 11 children currently enrolled because of that line item," he continued, as if he were reading from a report. "Ages 6 through 14. The headmaster sends me their progress reports quarterly. I keep them in the library." "You keep their progress reports," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He picked up his coffee again. "Because someone should." The table was quiet. Outside, one of the stable hands was calling to someone across the yard, and the sound of it ordinary, unhurried, the texture of a morning that had nothing to do with $40 secrets and children whose parents couldn't know someone cared, made the silence between them feel strangely intimate. Charlotte looked at this man that all of Virginia had decided was broken, and she thought 17 errors. The way she'd thought of her grandfather's ledgers. The way a wrong number carried forward long enough could corrupt an entire system. "I'll record it accurately," she said. "On my end. You can tell me how you want it categorized." Nathaniel looked at her. "You're not going to ask more questions. Not right now." She picked up her fork. "Right now I'm going to have breakfast. The questions will keep." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Thank you, Miss Whitmore." She didn't answer, but she thought that's the second decent thing. She was keeping count. The week that followed moved in ways Charlotte hadn't expected. She had prepared herself for coldness, for the polite managed distance of a man who had purchased a household function and expected it to operate without inconvenience. She had not prepared for Nathaniel Ashford to be genuinely, consistently, almost aggressively normal. He worked. That was the first thing she noticed. He worked constantly from early morning until well past dark, moving between the library and a small office off the back hall, where he kept a separate set of files she hadn't been given access to yet. He met with men who arrived quietly, unannounced, in plain clothes, and left the same way. He wrote letters every evening, long ones sealed before she could see the addresses. He slept less than she did, which was saying something because Charlotte was not sleeping well. But he also appeared at breakfast every morning. He asked her every morning one question about the accounts, about something she'd read once, about whether she'd had a chance to look at the back garden yet, because the groundskeeper had asked if she had any preferences. He never asked more than one question. She had begun to suspect this was deliberate, that he was rationing himself, careful not to crowd her, giving her exactly enough to keep a conversation alive, without pushing her toward anything she wasn't ready for. It was, she thought, the most considerate thing an inconsiderate situation had ever produced. On the 8th day, she found the children. Not literally, she didn't stumble onto a schoolroom hidden in the east wing. What she found was a receipt tucked into the back of the supply ledger for 12 pairs of winter boots. Children's sizes. Paid in October of the previous year, delivered to an address in town she recognized as the church on Maple Street. And next to the receipt, in Nathaniel's handwriting, precise, slightly angular, the hand of a man who'd been educated seriously and used that education seriously, a list of 12 names and ages. Charlotte sat with that list for a long time. Then she went and found Mrs. Hadley. "The church on Maple Street," she said. "Does Mr. Ashford have a connection there?" Mrs. Hadley looked at her steadily. In 8 days, Charlotte had come to understand that Mrs. Hadley's steadiness was not blankness, it was evaluation. The housekeeper was always quietly measuring something. "He contributes to their winter relief fund," she said. "Has done for 4 years, anonymously." Anonymously. The Reverend knows, of course, but the congregation doesn't. A pause. Mr. Ashford was specific about that. Charlotte nodded slowly. And the school, the church, the orphanage on the county road. Mrs. Hadley's voice remained even, but something in it had shifted, something that sounded like pride, that had been kept quiet for a long time and was relieved finally to have somewhere to go. "He's been funding all 3 since the year after the scandal. When he had nothing left to lose publicly, he decided to do what he wanted with the money privately." Charlotte thought about that. About a man stripped of every public role, no political standing, no social credibility, no place in the world that Virginia had decided he deserved, who had responded not by collapsing inward, but by building outward. Quietly, without credit, without anyone to know. "He's going to hate that I know this," she said. "Probably," Mrs. Hadley agreed. "He's a private man." "He's a stubborn man," Charlotte said. "There's a difference." For the first time since Charlotte had arrived, Mrs. Hadley smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that had clearly been in storage for a while. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "There is." That evening, Charlotte waited until after supper, when Nathaniel had retreated to the library the way he always did, the door not quite closed, which she had begun to read as an invitation that stopped short of asking. She pushed it open and walked in without knocking. He was at his desk reading. He looked up without surprise, which told her he'd heard her coming. "Miss Whitmore." 12 pairs of winter boots," she said. "Children's sizes, church on Maple Street." He said nothing. "And the orphanage on the county road," she continued. "And the school, and 11 children whose parents don't know someone's paying their fees." She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited. "You've been doing this for 4 years. You've been here 9 days, he said. "I read quickly," she said. Same words as before. She watched him absorb the echo of them. He closed the book, set it aside, looked at her with that careful measuring attention that she was beginning to understand was not coldness. It was the expression of a man who had learned to think before he spoke, because he'd found that the world was very ready to take his words and twist them. "What would you like me to say?" "Nothing," she said. "I don't need you to explain yourself. I just needed you to know that I know." She paused. "Because I'm keeping accounts, Mr. Ashford, not just the household ones." He was quiet for a long moment. The fire in the grate behind him shifted and settled, and the light moved across his face in a way that showed the tiredness in it. Real tiredness, the kind that went deeper than one bad night. The kind that had been accumulating for years. "Victor Langley," he said. Charlotte went still. It was the first time he had said that name since supper on her first night when she'd asked, and he'd closed the door on it. Now he said it himself unprompted, and the weight of it in the room was immediate and specific, the weight of something that had been pressing against the inside of a door for a long time. "He was the one who destroyed you," she said. "Not a question. He was the one who built the lie," Nathaniel said. 5 years ago. I was 26. I was about to stand for a seat in the state legislature. There was a faction, Langley's faction, that controlled the banking legislation in Richmond. I had made it publicly clear that I intended to challenge that legislation, that I believed it was being used to consolidate land and credit into the hands of about 11 families at the expense of everyone else in Virginia. He paused. I was right, and I was about to be in a position to prove it. Charlotte leaned forward slightly. "Langley moved first," Nathaniel continued. "I don't know all the details of how it was constructed. I've spent 5 years trying to find out. What I know is that 2 men came forward at the Richmond gathering with a story. A detailed, specific, shameful story about me. About my private life." His voice was level, but there was something beneath it. Not humiliation exactly. Something that had moved past humiliation into something colder. The story was false. I knew it was false. But false stories told in the right rooms don't need to be proven. They only need to be believed. And Virginia believed it, Charlotte said. Virginia was already looking for a reason to believe something was wrong with me, he said. I'd been making people uncomfortable for 2 years. A man who asks too many questions about where the money goes makes certain people very nervous. He looked at her. It's easier to destroy a man's character than to answer his questions. The fire shifted again. Charlotte sat with the full weight of what he'd just told her. Not the surface of it, the scandal and the ruin and the exile, but the structure underneath. The targeted, deliberate destruction of a man, because he had been about to tell the truth about powerful people. The files, she said slowly. The ones in the locked cabinet in your office. His eyes sharpened. You notice those. I notice everything, she said. Are they what I think they are? A long pause. The longest pause he'd given her yet. She could see him deciding not whether to trust her exactly, but how far. How much. Whether the ground between them, which had been shifting slowly and quietly all week, was solid enough to hold what he was about to put on it. Come with me, he said. He stood, crossed to the locked cabinet against the far wall, produced a key from his waistcoat pocket and opened it. Inside were not files, not exactly. They were ledgers, dozens of them. Older, worn the covers soft from handling. And behind the ledgers folded documents, maps, letters still in their envelopes, the seals broken and carefully preserved. 5 years of evidence, he said. Transaction records, land transfers, letters between Langley and the men who run the 3 largest banks in Richmond. Testimonies I've collected from people who were in rooms I wasn't in. He didn't touch any of it, just stood back so she could see. It's nearly enough, not quite. There are 2 transactions I can't fully document, 2 transfers that connect Langley directly to the original land seizures. If I could establish those 2 links, the entire structure collapses. Charlotte looked at the cabinet. At 5 years of careful, solitary, invisible work. At a man who had lost everything and had spent the years since not grieving it, but building a case. You need an accountant, she said. He looked at her. That's what you actually need, she said. Someone who can look at those transactions and find the thread. Someone who can read what a number is hiding. She met his eyes. That's why you made inquiries about me, isn't it? It wasn't just that I needed protection. It was that you needed someone who could read a ledger the way other people can't. The silence stretched between them. Both things can be true, he said. It wasn't a confirmation. It wasn't a denial. It was the honest answer of a man who had learned to be precise about what he admitted and what he withheld, and who had just Charlotte, was almost certain admitted more than he'd planned to. She looked at the cabinet one more time, at the years of evidence, at the shape of a fight she had stumbled into without knowing it was a fight. "Show me the 2 transactions," she said. "Miss Whitmore, show me," she said. "You brought me in here. You opened the cabinet. You told me what you needed." She kept her voice steady. "Don't stop now because it suddenly feels like too much. I've been reading your numbers for 9 days and I already know something is wrong in Langley's accounts. I just didn't know what I was looking at yet." Nathaniel Ashford stared at her, and then he reached into the cabinet and pulled out a ledger. They worked until 2 in the morning. Charlotte sat at his desk. He pulled a second chair to the side so they could both see the pages, and she went through the records the way she had gone through her grandfather's timber accounts at the age of 12, slowly, methodically, without assumption. She asked questions. He answered them. She asked more questions. He answered those too. Somewhere around midnight, she found a carry-forward error, not an innocent one, not the kind her grandfather made, but the deliberate kind, the kind you made when you needed a number to be somewhere it wasn't. And she set her finger on it and said, "There." And Nathaniel leaned over her shoulder to look, and for a moment they were simply 2 people who had found the same thing and understood its importance, and nothing else in the room existed. "That's one," she said. "Yes." "The second one is in a different ledger." "Yes." "You've known about the first one for how long?" 8 months. "And you couldn't prove it was deliberate without the second one." "Correct." Charlotte leaned back in the chair, looked at the ceiling. Did the mathematics in her head, not the ledger mathematics, the other kind, the kind where you calculated what a piece of information was worth and what it would cost the person who acted on it? "Mr. Ashford," she said, "when you find the second link, when you can prove all of this, what happens to Victor Langley?" "He loses everything," Nathaniel said, simply. Without satisfaction, she noticed. Just fact. "And what happens to you?" A pause. "I get my name back." Charlotte looked at him, at the tiredness in his face, at the years of it. "Is that enough?" she asked. "After all of this, is a name enough?" He held her gaze for a long moment, and something moved in his expression, something she hadn't seen there before. Not the carefully managed steadiness he showed the world. Something rawer than that. Something that looked like a man who had not let himself want anything in a very long time being asked what he wanted. "I don't know yet," he said quietly. "Ask me when we find it." When he had said, "Not if," Charlotte picked up the ledger, turned to the next page. "Then we'd better find it," she said. Outside, the Virginia summer night sat heavy and warm over Ashford Manor, and somewhere in the dark, beyond the library windows, 12 miles from a world that had decided both of them were finished, 2 people who had been sold and discarded and underestimated were quietly building the thing that would bring the most powerful man in Virginia to his knees. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew it. And in the accounting of what was known and what was unknown, that was the moment the balance finally began to shift. They found the second transaction on a Thursday. Charlotte had been awake since 4 in the morning, not from insomnia this time, but from the specific electric restlessness of a person who is close to something and knows it. She had gone back through Langley's supply ledgers 3 times in the past week, each pass tighter than the last, narrowing the search, the way you narrowed the search for a carry-forward error, not by looking harder at the same places, but by eliminating every place. It wasn't until only one place remained. She found it in a grain merchant's receipt. A single receipt folded into the back of a ledger from 1812, recorded under a supplier name that didn't exist. She knew it didn't exist because she had spent 2 days cross-referencing every legitimate grain merchant operating in Richmond and the surrounding counties in 1812. And this name appeared nowhere except this one entry in this one ledger for a payment of exactly $3,000. $3,000, paid to a name that didn't exist. Recorded in handwriting that was not the regular bookkeeper's, she had compared enough pages to know the difference, and dated 4 days before the first of the land transfers, that had started Langley's consolidation of the river properties. She carried the ledger to Nathaniel's office at 6 in the morning without knocking. He was already at his desk. He looked up, took one look at her face and stood. "You found it," he said. She set the ledger on his desk and put her finger on the entry. He leaned in. "Read it. Read it again." She watched his jaw set, not with anger exactly, with the particular tightness of a man who has been waiting 5 years for a single piece of paper and is now looking at it. "The supplier doesn't exist," she said. "I checked every merchant record I could access. This name appears nowhere. It was created for this payment and never used again. Which means the $3,000 went somewhere else," he said. "To whoever signed the land transfer on Langley's behalf 4 days later," Charlotte said. "This is the bribe Mr. Ashford, written down, in a ledger he apparently decided was safe to keep because no one would ever look this carefully at a grain receipt." Nathaniel straightened. He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man recalibrating. Then he crossed to the locked cabinet, opened it, and stood looking at everything inside with the expression of someone who has just watched 5 years of solitary work become something that could actually move. "I need to get this to Philadelphia," he said. "There are 2 journalists men I've been in contact with for over a year. They've been waiting for this piece. Without it, everything else was circumstantial." He turned to face her. "With it, it isn't." "How long?" Charlotte asked. "A week, maybe less if the roads are clear." He paused. "I'll need to send someone I trust absolutely, and I'll need to move the rest of the files somewhere Langley's people can't reach them if he finds out we're moving." Charlotte felt it then, the first real pulse of fear, not the low-grade manageable dread she'd been carrying since the carriage ride to Ashford Manor. Something sharper. "You think he has people watching this house?" "I think Victor Langley has watched this house since the day I moved into it," Nathaniel said. His voice was even, but his eyes were not. "I've assumed it for years. I've been careful because of it. But careful only buys you time, Miss Whitmore. It doesn't win." She looked at him. "What does win?" "Speed," he said. "And the right information in the right hands before he knows it's gone." She nodded once. "Then tell me what you need me to do." He looked at her for a long moment. That careful measuring look she had come to understand was not assessment of her capability, but something else. Something more complicated. The look of a man who had been alone in a fight for 5 years and was still learning what it felt like not to be. "Help me copy the core documents," he said. "Tonight. Everything essential goes into 2 separate packets. One travels to Philadelphia. One stays here somewhere he won't find it." "Where?" she asked. He almost smiled. "That," he said, "is what I was hoping you'd help me figure out." They worked through the night again. It was becoming a pattern, the 2 of them at his desk. After midnight, the house quiet around them, working with the focused efficiency of people who had discovered somewhat, to their mutual surprise, that they thought well together. Charlotte copied documents in her precise hand, while Nathaniel organized and cross-referenced, and they talked, while they worked, not about the evidence, but around it, the way people talked when they were doing something important together. And the work itself was the thing that made the conversation possible. "Your grandfather," Nathaniel said at one point, not looking up from what he was reading. "The one who taught you accounting. What was he like?" Charlotte kept writing. "Difficult," she said. "Demanding. He had very specific opinions about everything, and absolutely no patience for people who hadn't thought carefully about their opinions before expressing them." She paused. "He was the best person I've ever known." "He sounds like it." "He would have found this," she said, gesturing at the documents between them. "He would have found it in a week and brought it to the governor's office himself and stood there until someone paid attention." She smiled briefly at the page in front of her. "He had no fear of powerful men. He said the only thing that made powerful men powerful was other people's willingness to pretend they were." Nathaniel set down what he was reading. "He sounds like someone who would have made Victor Langley very nervous." "He made everyone nervous," Charlotte said. "That was how you knew he was right." The silence that followed was warm rather than empty. Outside, the summer night, pressed against the windows, and the candles burned lower, and Charlotte thought, "This is the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. This is the most alive I have felt in years." She didn't say it, but she thought it clearly enough that it startled her. and she pressed her pen slightly harder against the page to anchor herself. 2 days later, the courier left for Philadelphia at dawn. Nathaniel watched him go from the front window. Charlotte stood beside him close enough that she could feel the tension in him without touching him. The courier was a man named Garrett, who had worked for Nathaniel's father, and whose loyalty had been tested enough times over the past 5 years that it had become simply a fact like the walls of the house or the depth of the well. "Now we wait," Nathaniel said. "How long before Langley moves?" Charlotte asked. "If he doesn't know yet, 2 weeks, maybe 3. He turned from the window. "If he already knows less." She absorbed this. "What does he do when he moves?" "Last time, Nathaniel said he used witnesses. Men who were willing to say things under oath that weren't true in exchange for things Langley was willing to give." He paused. "This time, I don't think he'll use witnesses." The way he said it, the specific flatness of it, made the hair on the back of Charlotte's neck rise. "What do you think he'll use?" Nathaniel looked at her. His eyes were steady, but she had learned over the past 2 weeks to read the things underneath his steadiness. Right now, underneath it was something that looked like the decision to be honest about something he would have preferred to protect her from. "Pressure," he said. "Direct pressure. On the people closest to me. On anyone who might be used as leverage." A pause. "I want you to be careful, Miss Whitmore, when you go to town, when you go to church. I want you to take someone with you, not just a driver. Someone I trust." Charlotte looked at him. "He would come after me." "He would come after anything I cared about," Nathaniel said. The sentence landed in the room and sat there. Neither of them acknowledged it directly. Neither of them looked away from it either. "All right," Charlotte said. "I'll take James when I go to church Sunday." "Thank you," he said. And then, as if the earlier sentence hadn't happened, as if he hadn't just told her in the most oblique possible way that she was something he cared about. "I have a meeting this morning. 3 men coming in from Richmond. I'd like you present if you're willing." She blinked. "At the meeting? You've read all the documents. You understand the financial structure better than any of them." He held her gaze. "And you notice things I don't. I've watched you do it for 2 weeks. You notice what people aren't saying." She had not expected that. She had not expected to be seen that clearly, that quickly by anyone, let alone by this man in this house inside this strange arrangement that was becoming something neither of them had a name for yet. "Yes," she said. "I'll be there." The 3 men from Richmond arrived at 10. Their names were Hale Pritchard, and a man introduced only as Cooper, who said very little and watched everything. They were not politicians, or rather, they were the kind of men who operated adjacent to politics in the spaces between official positions, where the real decisions were made and unmade. They had the look of men who had been careful for a long time about what they said in front of women, and they adjusted to Charlotte's presence at the table with varying degrees of success. Hale adjusted immediately. Pritchard took about 10 minutes. Cooper watched her for 30 minutes without speaking, and then said without preamble, "You found the grain merchant entry." Everyone at the table looked at him, then at Charlotte. "Yes," she said. "How long did it take you?" 11 days from when I started on the ledgers," she said. "I would have found it faster if I'd known specifically what I was looking for. I was cross-referencing blind." Cooper nodded slowly. "Langley's bookkeeper has been with him for 20 years, he said. "He's careful. Nobody has found a direct link in 5 years. "He was careful in the right-hand columns," Charlotte said. "He wasn't careful enough in the receipts. People who hide money in ledgers focus on making the numbers balance. They forget about the paper trail underneath the numbers." Cooper looked at her for another moment. Then he turned to Nathaniel and said, "Where did you find her?" "Virginia," Nathaniel said without inflection. Charlotte kept her expression neutral, but she felt something she hadn't expected, the simple, unfamiliar warmth of being in a room where her competence was the thing that mattered. Not her family name, not her face, not her position. What she could do, what she saw. What she found in 11 days that nobody else had found in 5 years. The meeting went 3 hours. By the end of it, a plan had taken shape, not fully formed, still with gaps, but a real plan with sequence and contingency and a timeline attached. The Philadelphia journalists would need 2 weeks to verify and prepare. Hale had a contact at the Richmond Inquirer, who could run parallel coverage simultaneously, so Langley couldn't suppress one paper without the other going to print. Cooper had 3 witnesses who had been waiting men who had been pressured or bought by Langley years ago, and were now for various reasons willing to talk. They had been waiting for exactly this documentary evidence that made their testimony something other than one man's word against Victor Langley's reputation. When this breaks, Pritchard said, it breaks completely. There's no half measure. Either we hand him everything at once, or we give him time to move his assets and disappear into a version of the story he controls. Everything at once, Nathaniel said. In 3 weeks, Cooper said. If the Philadelphia end holds. The men from Richmond left at midday. Charlotte and Nathaniel stood in the front room after they'd gone, and for a moment neither of them spoke the particular silence of 2 people who have just crossed a line they cannot uncross and are taking a breath before the next thing begins. Cooper, Charlotte said. He's not just a contact, is he? No, Nathaniel said. He's been building this case longer than you have. He lost land to Langley's consolidation in 1810, Nathaniel said. His family's property. 3 generations of it. He paused. He came to me 2 years after the scandal. He'd already started collecting evidence. We've been working together since. Charlotte thought about that. About the network of people that existed around Nathaniel Ashford. People who had been quietly, patiently, carefully building toward this for years. People the world didn't know existed, because the world had decided Nathaniel was a broken man in an empty house and stopped looking. He built an army, she said, while everyone thought he was hiding. Not an army, Nathaniel said. A case. A pause. There's a difference. Is there? He almost smiled. An army needs a battle. A case needs a moment. And this is the moment. Yes, he said. This is the moment. 4 days later, the servant was bought. Charlotte found out not from Nathaniel, but from Mrs. Hadley, who came to her sitting room on a Tuesday afternoon, with her jaw set in a way that Charlotte had come to recognize as the housekeeper's version of controlled fury. A young man named Peter, one of the stable hands employed at Ashford Manor for 8 months, had been seen twice in the past week, meeting with a man from town who worked. Mrs. Hadley believed in Senator Langley's household. Charlotte set down her pen. Does Nathaniel know? I'm telling you first, Mrs. Hadley said, because I want to know what you think we should do before we tell him. He'll want to confront the boy directly, and I'm not certain that's wise. Charlotte thought for exactly 3 seconds. No, don't confront him. Don't let him know we've seen anything. If he's reporting to Langley, the most valuable thing we have right now is knowing what he knows and what he tells them. She paused. What does Peter have access to? The stables, the kitchen, the main hall when he's sent in for deliveries. Mrs. Hadley's eyes were sharp. Not the library. Not the office. Then he knows someone is coming and going, Charlotte said. He may know about the men from Richmond. He may know a courier left for Philadelphia. She stood. He doesn't know what's in the documents. He doesn't know what we found. What do? We give him something to report, Charlotte said. Something that sounds important and isn't. She met Mrs. Hadley's eyes. Can you manage that? The housekeeper looked at her for a moment, with an expression that was equal parts assessment, and something that might carefully be called respect. I've been managing this household for 11 years, ma'am, she said. I can manage a stable hand. Good. Charlotte moved toward the door. Now I need to tell Nathaniel. He was in the library. He always was at this hour. She pushed open the door she had stopped knocking 2 weeks ago, and he had stopped noting it and told him in clear, direct sentences exactly what Mrs. Hadley had seen. He listened without interrupting. His face did the thing she'd come to understand, the careful, deliberate stillness that was not absence of feeling, but the management of it. When she finished, he was quiet for 5 seconds. She counted, and then he said, How long? Mrs. Hadley thinks at least a week, possibly since the men from Richmond came. Then Langley knows someone came to the house. Yes, he probably knows a courier left for Philadelphia. But not what was sent. No, Charlotte said. Not what was sent. Another 5 seconds of silence. Then Nathaniel walked to the window and stood with his back to her for a moment. She let him. She had learned that he needed a specific kind of space when he was recalibrating. Not comfort, not company, just time. "It changes the timeline," he said finally. "Yes." "He'll move faster than 3 weeks." "Yes." He turned around. His eyes were steady, but beneath the steadiness, she could see something burning, not fear, not anger exactly. The particular intensity of a man who has spent 5 years preparing for one moment and is now watching that moment accelerate toward him faster than he planned. "Then we move faster," he said. "We need to get word to Cooper," Charlotte said, "and to Philadelphia. They need to know the timeline has compressed. I'll send Garrett tonight." He paused. "And the documents that are still here, the originals?" "I know where to put them," Charlotte said. He looked at her. "There's a space in the floor of the East Wing sitting room," she said. "Under the left corner board near the window. I found it the second week I was here. It was already there, probably original to the house. No one would look there." She paused. "I've been thinking about it since you first showed me the cabinet, in case we ever needed it." Nathaniel Ashford stared at her. "You've been planning for this," he said. "Since the second week." "I've been planning for contingencies," she said. "There's a difference." He almost laughed. It wasn't quite a laugh, it was the sound a man made when something surprised him so completely that his body responded before his composure could stop it. Brief. Real. Gone almost immediately, but it had been there and Charlotte felt it like a match struck in a dark room. "All right," he said, and his voice was different, steadier in a different way. The way a thing was steady when it was supported, rather than just standing on its own. "Tonight, we move everything tonight." They moved through the house after dark. Quiet, methodical, the two of them, and Mrs. Hadley and Garrett, who had not yet left for Philadelphia, and now would carry twice the urgency when he did. They worked in near silence, and Charlotte led them to the East Wing sitting room, and knelt on the floor and lifted the board she had found 3 weeks ago, and the space beneath it was exactly as she'd remembered Drydark, large enough. Nathaniel crouched beside her as she fit the wrapped packet of originals into the space. His shoulder was close to hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool of the floor-level air. He didn't speak. He watched her work with the same focused attention he gave to everything, and when she pressed the board back into place and sat back on her heels, he said very quietly, "Thank you." It was the same thing he'd said that first morning at breakfast about the school and the $40 ledger line, but it meant something different now. She could hear the difference. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We haven't won anything." "No," he agreed. "But we're not losing anymore." She looked at him, really looked at him the way she had been carefully not doing for the past 3 weeks, because looking at him carefully felt like standing too close to something she wasn't ready to name. He looked back. The house was quiet around them. The summer dark sat heavy against the windows. "Mr. Ashford," she said. "Nathaniel," he said. It was the first time he'd offered it. She absorbed that. Nathaniel. His name in her mouth felt like stepping onto new ground, testing the weight. "What happens to us after this?" "When it's over." He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "That depends," he said, "on what you want." It was the most open thing he had ever said to her, the most undefended. She could hear how much it cost him, not in pain exactly, but in exposure, in the willingness to want something and admit it might not be given. Before she could answer, Garrett appeared in the doorway. "Sir," he said, "there's a rider coming up the drive. Fast." Nathaniel was on his feet before Charlotte had fully stood. He moved to the window and looked out, and she watched his face, watched the steadiness of it, hold, and then shift into something sharp and specific. "It's Cooper," he said. "He's riding alone." Charlotte stood. "That's not what we planned." "No," Nathaniel said. His voice had gone very quiet. "It is not." He moved toward the door, and Charlotte followed because she had stopped waiting to be invited to things that concerned her 2 weeks ago, and she was not about to start now. Cooper came through the front door breathing hard, his coat dusty from hard riding, and he looked at Nathaniel with the expression of a man who has ridden 12 miles at speed, specifically to say something, and is going to say it without preamble. "Langley knows," he said. "Not what you found, but that you found something. One of the Philadelphia journalists talked to the wrong person. Langley's had a man at the paper for 2 years. He caught his breath. He's moving tonight. I don't know the target yet, but he's moving. The hallway was very still. Charlotte looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Cooper. And in the space between those three people standing in the dark hallway of Ashford Manor, with the evidence hidden under the floor of the East Wing, and a senator moving somewhere in the Virginia night, the war that had been building for 5 years stopped being preparation. It became real. Then so are we, Nathaniel said. Cooper had ridden 12 miles in under an hour, and he was still catching his breath when Nathaniel pulled him into the library and closed the door. Charlotte followed without being asked. Nobody told her to stay out. She had noticed somewhere in the past 3 weeks that the moment had passed when anyone in this house thought of her as peripheral. She sat in the chair across from Cooper and watched him and waited. "Tell me exactly what you know," Nathaniel said. "Not what you think, what you know." Cooper leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "My contact at the Richmond Enquirer sent word 2 hours ago. Langley's man at the Philadelphia paper, a junior editor named Marsh, reported back to Langley's office yesterday morning. He doesn't know what's in the documents, but he knows Garrett came from Ashford Manor, and he knows the journalists were treating it as something significant enough to hold the front page." He paused. "Langley called a meeting last night. My contact wasn't in the room, but he was close enough to the door to hear the name Ashford said 4 times in 20 minutes. "What else?" Nathaniel said. "He's sending men here," Cooper said. "Not sheriff's men his own, with a writ. He's had a judge in his pocket for 3 years, and he's using it tonight. The writ claims you've been in possession of stolen financial records belonging to the Langley Family Trust." He met Nathaniel's eyes directly. "It's a fabrication. But a writ is a writ, and if his men get inside this house before the journalists publish, they can take everything and it disappears." The room went very quiet. Charlotte did the mathematics in her head, not ledger mathematics this time, but the other kind. How far was Langley's estate from Ashford Manor? How long since Cooper's contact had sent word? How much lead time they had, if any? "How long do we have?" she asked. Cooper looked at her. 2 hours. Maybe 3. Nathaniel stood absolutely still for 5 seconds. She counted. She had learned to count his silences because the length of them told her things. Then he said, "The originals are safe." "The East Wing floor," Charlotte said. "Yes. Cooper, the copies I sent to Philadelphia. Can the journalists publish before morning?" "Not from scratch," Cooper said. "But if I ride back tonight and deliver the verification myself, tell them the timeline has collapsed and Langley is moving, they can push it to the early edition. It prints at 4 in the morning." He paused. "That's tight." "How tight?" "If Langley's men arrive here at midnight and find nothing if the writ comes up empty, he loses his legal window. He can't come back with the same writ twice. It buys you 48 hours. Cooper's voice was steady, but his eyes were not. "Enough time for the paper to print. Enough time for the Richmond Enquirer to run the parallel piece. After that, it's public. He can't suppress public." Nathaniel turned to the window. 1 second. 2. Charlotte watched his shoulders, the set of them, the slight shift as he made the decision she already knew he was going to make. "Go," he said. "Ride back tonight. Tell them to print." Cooper stood immediately. "And this house?" "I'll handle this house," Nathaniel said. Cooper looked at Charlotte, then back at Nathaniel, with the expression of a man who had one more thing to say, and was deciding whether to say it. He said it. "Langley's writ covers the house and the grounds. It does not cover her." He nodded toward Charlotte. "If his men come and she's here, they'll use her. Not physically, Langley's too careful for that. But they'll use her presence to establish that you have something to hide, that this is a household with secrets worth protecting." A pause. "She should not be here when they arrive." Charlotte opened her mouth. Nathaniel spoke first. "She stays," he said. "That's not a discussion." Cooper looked at him for a moment with something that was not quite surprise, more like confirmation of something he'd already suspected. "All right," he said. He picked up his hat. 4 in the morning then, if God and the roads are willing." He was out the door in 60 seconds. Nathaniel turned to face Charlotte. She was already on her feet. I was going to say I agree with him, she said. For the record. I know, he said. Then why? Because if you're not here when they arrive, it looks like flight, he said. It looks like we knew they were coming, and we panicked. A household where the wife is present and calm and cooperative tells a different story than a household where she's disappeared in the night. He held her gaze. I need you here, Charlotte. Not because I don't want you safe, because your being here makes us safer. It was the first time he'd used her given name without being invited to. She wasn't sure he'd noticed. She was very sure she had. All right, she said. Then tell me what you need. What he needed, it turned out, was for the house to look exactly like a house that had nothing to hide. They worked fast. Mrs. Hadley was brought in. She listened to the situation in 30 seconds and began moving without being asked with the precise efficiency of a woman who had been prepared for exactly this contingency without ever being told to prepare for it. The visible ledgers, the household accounts, the supply records, everything that lived in the open were arranged with the deliberate naturalness of things that had simply always been there. The locked cabinet in the library was unlocked, and its remaining contents reduced to what any gentleman farmer might reasonably keep: property records, correspondence receipts, for legitimate expenditure. Everything that mattered was already under the east wing floor. That had been Charlotte's contingency planned in the second week, and she felt the shape of that foresight now, like a physical thing, the quiet satisfaction of a number that balances. At 10 o'clock, Nathaniel called her into the library. Sit down, he said. Please. She sat. He remained standing, not from agitation, she had learned to read the difference, but from the particular energy of a man who needed to say something and found it easier to say on his feet. There is something I haven't told you, he said. About Langley. About what he did specifically 5 years ago. Charlotte waited. You know the broad shape of it, he said. The two men who came forward, the story they told. What you don't know is that I knew one of them. He stopped, started again. Daniel Marsh, not the editor, a different man, same name. He worked for my father for 6 years. I trusted him. I had brought him into my confidence about the banking investigation because I needed someone inside the Richmond Financial District who could verify certain account numbers for me. A pause. Langley found him. I don't know how. I don't know what he offered him: money probably, and protection. Daniel told Langley everything I had. And then he stood in a room full of Virginia's most powerful men and told a lie about me that was specific enough and detailed enough to be almost impossible to disprove. Charlotte was very still. He didn't just destroy me, Nathaniel said. He used the trust I'd given him as the weapon. The things he said, the details that made people believe it, they were constructed from real things, real moments, real conversations, real occasions, real places twisted into something unrecognizable. His voice was even, but the evenness was costing something tonight. She could hear the cost of it. I have spent 5 years being very careful about trust, about who I tell things to, about how much I let people see. He stopped. Charlotte looked at him. And then I arrived, she said quietly. And then you arrived, he said, and found 17 errors in my household ledgers in 9 days, and walked into my office at 6 in the morning with a grain receipt and told me you'd found the second link. He finally sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, in a posture she had never seen from him before. Open. Unguarded in a way that looked almost unfamiliar on him, like a coat he'd stopped wearing years ago and had just put back on. I want you to know that what I told you about Daniel, about how it was done, I have not told that to Cooper. I have not told it to Garrett. I have not told it to Mrs. Hadley, who has worked for me for 11 years. He held her gaze. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what you're in and what it cost the last person I trusted and what that means for how carefully I've tried to... He stopped again. To protect me from the same thing, she said. Yes. The room was very quiet. Charlotte thought about her father, who had trusted her with nothing and cost her everything. She thought about the ledger columns, known and unknown. She thought about what it meant to be told a true thing by a man who had paid very specifically for the last true thing he gave someone. Nathaniel, she said. His name still felt like new ground, but ground she was beginning to trust. What Daniel did to you that wasn't the cost of trust. That was the cost of one man's cowardice and another man's money. She kept her voice even, the way he kept his, and she meant it, the way he meant things flatly as fact. You didn't make a mistake trusting him. He made a choice betraying you. Those aren't the same thing. He looked at her for a long moment. I know that, he said, in principle. You don't entirely believe it yet, she said. No, he admitted, not entirely. Then let me tell you something I believe entirely, she said. I have been in this house for 31 days. I have had access to everything you care about, your files, your evidence, your people, your name. I could have sent word to my father, who would have sold what he knew to the first man who paid him. I could have gone to the county clerk and told him what I found in the ledgers. I could have done any number of things that would have protected the Whitmore family's position at your expense. She held his gaze without flinching. I didn't. Not because you've been kind to me, though you have. Because I looked at what you're doing, and I decided it was worth protecting. A pause. I need you to know that. Before tonight gets complicated. Nathaniel looked at her with an expression that was entirely unmanaged, all the careful control of it gone just for a moment, and underneath it, something that had the quality of relief, so long deferred, it had nearly become unrecognizable. I know, he said quietly. I do know Charlotte. The sound of horses on the drive came at 11:47. Mrs. Hadley appeared in the library doorway. 6 men, sir. One of them's carrying papers. Nathaniel stood, straightened his coat, turned to Charlotte. Ready? Yes, she said. She stood, smoothed her dress, and lifted her chin in the specific way she had learned at the age of 12 from a man who had no fear of powerful men. Let's go. They met Langley's men in the front hall. The man with the papers was not Langley himself. Of course, it wasn't Langley himself, Charlotte noted, because powerful men sent other men to do things that might be witnessed and remembered. He was a lawyer named Aldridge, smooth-faced and careful-voiced, who presented the writ with the practiced courtesy of someone who had delivered bad news enough times to have developed a technique for it. Mr. Ashford, Aldridge said, I apologize for the hour. We have a writ authorizing the search and seizure of financial documents alleged to have been removed from the Langley Family Trust's possession. He held out the document. Nathaniel took it, read it. His face showed nothing. This writ, he said, claims that I am in possession of stolen materials. That is correct, sir. And on whose testimony was it issued? Senator Langley has sworn an affidavit. Senator Langley, Nathaniel said, has sworn an affidavit claiming that documents I have compiled over 5 years from public records, private testimonies, and the freely provided cooperation of numerous parties are in fact his stolen property. His voice was level conversational, almost gentle. That is a remarkable claim. Aldridge's expression shifted not much, but Charlotte caught it. The faint recalibration of a man who had been told this would be simple. Sir, if you'll simply allow us to... My wife will show you the household accounts, Nathaniel said. Every ledger in this house, every receipt, every record, every document that exists on these premises. We have nothing to hide, Mr. Aldridge, and we have nothing that belongs to Victor Langley. He stepped slightly aside. Charlotte. She stepped forward, and she spent the next 90 minutes doing what she did better than almost anyone in Virginia. She showed them the books. Every household ledger, every supply receipt, every crop record and correspondence file. She walked Aldridge's men through them with the calm, detailed fluency of a woman who had been keeping accounts since she was 12 years old, answering their questions precisely, never volunteering more than was asked, never showing the specific, narrow, burning focus that was keeping her absolutely present and absolutely controlled, while her heart was doing something considerably less controlled in her chest. Aldridge watched her. At the 40-minute mark, he stopped one of his men from opening a cabinet and said, Mrs. Ashford, these are your records. You maintain them yourself. I do, Charlotte said. I've kept accounts for this household since I arrived. Mr. Ashford gave me full access and authority over the financial records. She held Aldridge's gaze pleasantly. Is there a specific entry you'd like to examine? Aldridge looked at her for a long moment, then at the ledgers spread before him, then at his men who had been through every accessible room in the house and were reporting quietly and with increasing discomfort that there was nothing here that matched the writ's description. At 12:43 in the morning, Aldridge gathered his papers. "I apologize for the disturbance," he said. He said it to Nathaniel, but he was looking at Charlotte. "Not at all," Nathaniel said. "I hope you'll convey my regards to Senator Langley, and my appreciation for his continued interest in the affairs of Ashford Manor." Aldridge left. The door closed. The house was silent. Mrs. Hadley appeared from the back hallway. Garrett appeared from upstairs. And Nathaniel turned to Charlotte and looked at her with an expression she had no name for something vast and quiet, and entirely without the careful management she had come to expect from him. 90 minutes, he said. They needed to believe it, she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. They did believe it. He took one step toward her. "Charlotte?" The knock at the door came hard and fast. Nathaniel went still, met Charlotte's eyes for 1 second, then turned and opened the door. It was not Aldridge. It was a young man she didn't recognize, barely 20, mud-splashed, breathing hard with the look of someone who had been riding since before dark. He held out a sealed letter. "Mr. Ashford, from Philadelphia. The journalist said to put it directly in your hands, sir. Nobody else's." Nathaniel took it, broke the seal, read it. Charlotte watched his face. It did the thing she had been waiting for, without knowing she was waiting for 31 days. The steadiness didn't crack. It didn't need to crack. It simply opened, like a door swinging wide on a room full of light. He looked up from the letter. "It's done," he said. It went to print at midnight. 4 papers: Philadelphia, Richmond, Boston, and Baltimore. His voice was very quiet. "It's already done." Charlotte put her hand over her mouth. Mrs. Hadley made a sound from the hallway that she immediately controlled. Nathaniel looked at the letter for another moment. Then he looked at Charlotte, and she could see it, everything he had not let himself feel for 5 years, all of it right there in his face, unmanaged and undefended and real. "It's done," he said again, as if he needed to say it twice to believe it. She crossed the hall in 3 steps and took the letter from his hands and read it herself, because she needed to see the words, because she was the kind of person who needed to see the numbers before she believed they balanced. The words were there, clear and printed and irrevocable. She handed it back to him. "Victor Langley," she said, "is finished." And somewhere in Virginia, in the last hours of a summer night, a man who had spent 5 years building a lie was reading the same words in 4 different newspapers, and understanding for the first time what it felt like to be on the wrong side of the truth. The morning came fast after that. By 6 o'clock, Hale had arrived from Richmond with word that Langley had not appeared at his office. By 8, Cooper rode in with confirmation that federal authorities had been contacted, that the evidence package, the witness testimonies, and the published accounts had been forwarded to men in Washington with the jurisdiction and, crucially, the motivation to act. By 10, a crowd had gathered at the edges of the Ashford property. Not hostile. Nothing like that. Just people. Neighbors. Farmers and shopkeepers, and men who had watched Nathaniel Ashford's name be destroyed 5 years ago and had perhaps privately wondered. Charlotte stood at the front window and watched them gather. Nathaniel came to stand beside her. Close. The way he'd stood beside her in the hallway on the night Cooper arrived, when the war had stopped being preparation and become real. She could feel the warmth of him, the solid presence of him, the particular quality of standing next to someone who has been through the same thing you've been through and come out the other side still standing. "They're coming to look," she said. "Yes," he said. "What are you going to do?" He was quiet for a moment. "Go out there," he said. "Talk to them. Tell them the truth the way I should have been able to do 5 years ago." He paused. "Will you come with me?" She looked at him, at the man Virginia had discarded, at the man who had funded 11 children's schooling in secret, who had kept their progress reports in a locked cabinet, who had chosen her specifically because someone told him she deserved better, and he had decided to provide it. At the man who had in 31 days become the most honest person she had ever known. "Yes," she said. "Of course I will." He opened the front door, and Charlotte Whitmore, who had signed her name on a marriage contract with a broken quill, and told herself survival was enough, walked out beside him into the Virginia morning, and the crowd that parted for them looked not at him the way they had looked 5 years ago, but at them, the two of them together. And something shifted in the air, the way it shifted before weather changed. Not hostility, not pity. Something that looked cautiously, and for the first time like belief. Nathaniel stopped at the edge of the porch steps. The crowd waited. "I have something to tell you," he said. His voice carried the way a voice carried when it had nothing left to hide. "And I'd like you to hear all of it before you decide what you think." He told them. He told them everything. Not the version that protected him, not the version designed to persuade, but the plain, unvarnished sequence of what had happened, and what had been done, and who had done it, and why. He spoke for 20 minutes, and nobody moved. Charlotte stood beside him and watched the faces in the crowd shift. Not all of them, not immediately, but enough. Enough for the truth to find the purchase it needed. When he finished, the crowd was silent for a long moment. Then an older farmer in the back, a man Charlotte didn't know, weathered and gray-haired, who had probably been standing in Virginia fields since before Nathaniel was born, took his hat off and held it to his chest. Just that. Just a hat held to a chest. But 3 men around him did the same thing, and then more. And the silence changed its quality the way a river changed its quality when the current turned. Nathaniel didn't speak again. There was nothing left to say. Charlotte reached over, not dramatically, not for the crowd, and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers immediately, without hesitation, the way you held something you had been afraid of losing before you knew you wanted it. Inside the house behind them, under the left corner board of the east wing sitting room floor, the evidence that had brought a powerful man to his knees sat safe and undiscovered, exactly where Charlotte had put it 3 weeks ago. In her careful accounting of what was known and what was unknown, she had always believed the truth would balance. It had. The letter from Edmund Whitmore arrived on a Monday. Charlotte recognized her father's handwriting on the envelope before she even picked it up. That particular slant slightly too elegant for the man who produced it. The handwriting of someone who had once believed presentation was the same thing as substance. She stood in the front hall of Ashford Manor and held the envelope for a moment without opening it. Mrs. Hadley appeared from the back corridor, read her face, and quietly withdrew. Charlotte opened the letter. It was 3 pages. Edmund had always written long. When he was ashamed, she had noticed that years ago, the way guilt expanded his sentences, the way he reached for words when he didn't have actions. The first page was apology. The second was news. Thomas had found work with a merchant in Richmond. William had been kept in school. Mary's blue dress fit perfectly, and she had worn it to church 3 Sundays in a row. The third page was a single paragraph that Charlotte read twice before she put the letter down. "I have heard what happened at Ashford Manor. All of Virginia has heard. I want you to know that I am proud of you, Charlotte. I know I have no right to that pride. I know I forfeited the right to it the morning I handed you that contract. But a man cannot see his daughter do what you have done and feel nothing. And I find I cannot be a coward about this the way I have been a coward about everything else. I am proud of you, that is all." She folded the letter, set it on the hall table, stood with her hands flat on the wood for a moment. Then she went to find Nathaniel. He was in the library. He was always in the library, but it was different now. The locked cabinet stood open most days. The files that had lived in darkness for 5 years had been transferred, cataloged, delivered to the federal authorities, who had arrived from Washington 6 days after the newspapers printed. The library felt lighter, or maybe that was just the summer morning coming through the windows differently than it had before. Charlotte was not always sure which changes were real and which were in the quality of her attention. He looked up when she came in. He always looked up when she came in. She had noticed that too. The specific immediacy of it, the way he didn't finish his sentence or his page first. "My father wrote," she said. "Is he well?" "He's the same," she said, "which means he's well enough." She sat in the chair she had claimed over the past 5 weeks as specifically hers, the one across from his desk, slightly angled close enough for conversation. "He said he's proud of me." Nathaniel set down his pen. "He should be. He also has no right to be," she said. "But I find I don't entirely mind." She paused. "That's strange, isn't it? Receiving something from someone who has no right to give it and finding it still means something. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "That's not strange at all." She knew what he meant. She didn't push at it. Some things were better understood than spoken, at least for now. "Cooper sent word this morning," Nathaniel said. "The federal hearing is set for the 14th. Langley's attorneys have filed 3 motions to delay. All 3 were denied." He said it without triumph. She had noticed that the way he delivered news of Langley's collapse with the same flat evenness he delivered everything. Not satisfaction, just fact. "The witnesses are confirmed. Daniel Marsh has agreed to provide a corrected affidavit." Charlotte went still. "Daniel Marsh." "Yes. He's going to recant." "He came to Cooper voluntarily," Nathaniel said, 2 days after the papers printed. Apparently seeing the full scope of what Langley had done in print in detail in 4 newspapers simultaneously was sufficient to overcome whatever Langley was holding over him. A pause. "He's terrified, but he's coming." Charlotte sat with that. With the image of the man who had taken Nathaniel's trust and weaponized it now walking into a federal hearing to undo what he'd done. She wanted to feel something sharp about it, anger maybe on Nathaniel's behalf. What she actually felt was something more complicated. Closer to exhaustion, on behalf of all the people whom powerful men had turned into instruments. "How do you feel about that?" she asked. "Daniel." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Relieved," he said finally, which surprised me. He picked up his pen again, turned it once in his fingers. "I spent a long time being angry at him. It was easier than being angry at Langley, because Langley felt untouchable, and Daniel was someone I had known. Someone real." He set the pen down again. "The anger was real, but it was also a habit, and somewhere in the past 5 weeks, I seem to have run out of room for it." Charlotte understood exactly what had taken up the room instead. She didn't say that either. She was still learning the geography of what could be said between them and what was better left as understood. "What happens to you?" she asked. "After the 14th, after it's officially done." He looked at her directly. "That depends," he said, on a conversation I've been putting off. Her heart did something specific. She kept her expression neutral. "How long have you been putting it off?" "About 3 weeks," he said, "give or take." "Since the night we moved the documents." "Since the night you told me what you believed entirely," he said. "Yes." The library was very quiet. Somewhere outside, one of the stable hands was talking to someone across the yard. The same ordinary sound that had been the backdrop to their first real conversation 5 weeks ago. And she was aware of it now. The way she was aware of the way the summer light came differently through the east windows in the morning, as something she had learned to read. Nathaniel stood. He came around the desk not quickly, not with the drama of a man who had rehearsed this, and he stopped in front of her and reached into his coat and produced an envelope and held it out. Charlotte looked at the envelope, then at him. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it," he said. She took it, opened it. Inside was a single folded document, legal paper, formal, with 2 signatures already on it and a space at the bottom for a third. She unfolded it and read it and then sat very still for a long moment. It was an annulment, prepared, signed by Nathaniel, and witnessed by a county clerk, requiring only her signature to be complete and binding. At the bottom in Nathaniel's handwriting, a single line that was not part of the legal text. "You owe me nothing. You never did." Charlotte looked at the paper for a long time. The clock on the library mantel counted 15 seconds. 20. "You had this prepared," she said. "Yes." "When?" 2 weeks ago, he said. "When it became clear that the case was going to hold, that Langley was finished." He stood very still, the stillness that cost something that she knew the price of now. "I told you when we married that I would never require anything from you that you hadn't freely chosen to give. The circumstances that brought you here were not free choices. They were your father's desperation, and my need, and a contract signed under duress." He held her gaze. "You found what we needed. You protected this house and this case, and—" He stopped, started again. "You have earned the right to leave Charlotte. I want you to know that. Whatever you decide, I will honor it. The debt is cleared. The Whitmore family accounts have been settled in full from the Ashford estate. Your brothers are provided for. You can go home, or you can go anywhere, and you will be— Stop, she said. He stopped. She stood up. The annulment document was in her hand. She looked at it one more time, at the careful legal language of it, at his signature, at the line he had written at the bottom in his precise and slightly angular hand. You owe me nothing. You never did. She thought about her grandfather, who had taught her that a number meant exactly what it said, and that the only honest accounting was the one where everything was visible. She thought about the columns she had started on her first night in this house, known unknown, and how the unknown column had emptied piece by piece over the past 5 weeks until what remained was simply what was true. She knew what was true. She had known for at least 3 weeks. She tore the annulment document in half. Nathaniel went absolutely still. She tore it again, set the pieces on his desk in a small, neat pile. Then she looked at him directly, without the careful management she had used for the first 3 weeks, without the ledger column distance she had kept between what she felt and what she showed. I came here as a bargain, she said. My father's debt for my life. I came here telling myself that survival was enough, that practical was enough, that a person could build a life out of nothing but necessity and competence, and it would be sufficient. She kept her voice steady, not because she wasn't feeling things, but because she was feeling them clearly enough to say them clearly. I was wrong, not about the competence, about the sufficient. Nathaniel had not moved. You put a writing desk in my room, she said, with paper and a pen already waiting. You had been told I kept accounts, and you put a writing desk in my room because you thought it would matter to me. She took one step toward him. It mattered to me. It mattered more than you know, because nobody had ever looked at what I could do and decided it was worth making room for. Not my father. Not anyone. Another step. You did, before you'd even spoken to me. You made room for what I was before you knew what I was, and I have been— Her voice did something briefly. She steadied it. I have been trying to be honest about what that means to me, and what I've concluded is that it means I am not going anywhere. The clock counted 5 more seconds. Then Nathaniel crossed the remaining distance between them in 2 steps and took her face in his hands carefully, the way he did everything that mattered to him, with the complete and unhurried attention of someone who understood the weight of what they were holding. And he looked at her the way she had caught him looking at her in unguarded moments for the past 2 weeks. Charlotte, he said. Yes, she said. I know. He kissed her. Not with the drama of a man who had been waiting, with the quiet certainty of one. And she kissed him back with the same certainty, the same steadiness, because that was what 5 weeks of building something real produced. Not fire exactly, though there was that too, but the deeper thing beneath the fire, the thing that held when everything else was stripped away. When they separated, she was still close enough to feel him breathing. I have a condition, she said. He almost laughed. It was becoming her favorite sound. Of course you do. The East Wing sitting room, she said. I want the floorboard properly secured. It's been loose for a week, and I keep thinking about it. This time, he did laugh real full, the laugh of a man who had forgotten and then remembered what it felt like. It filled the library the way the summer light filled it without asking permission. Done, he said. She stepped back, looked at the pieces of the annulment on his desk. You'll want to inform the county clerk. I'll send Garrett this afternoon. And Cooper will need to know the household situation is unchanged before the hearing, so there's no question of— Charlotte. His voice stopped her. He was looking at her with the expression she had no name for, the vast quiet one, the one that had been there on the morning the newspapers printed, and again when she'd taken his hand in front of the crowd. Stop accounting for a minute. She looked at him. I don't entirely know how to do that. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to stop permanently, just for a minute. She breathed. Let the ledger columns go quiet. All right, she said. 1 minute. He took her hand, just held it the way she'd held his on the porch, simply without ceremony, the way you held something you intended to keep. 1 minute passed. Then Charlotte picked up the torn pieces of the annulment, carried them to the fireplace, and fed them into the flames the same way she had fed her father's debt letter into the fire on the morning this had all begun. She watched the paper catch and blacken and dissolve. This time, though, what she was burning wasn't the evidence of how little she was worth. It was the last document that suggested she had ever needed permission to stay. The hearing on the 14th lasted 6 hours. Charlotte was not in the courtroom. Women were not in 1816 invited into federal proceedings, but she was in the building in an anteroom down the hall with Mrs. Hadley and a copy of the household accounts she was updating because she could not sit still without something in her hands, and she had long since stopped pretending otherwise. She heard when Daniel Marsh walked in. She heard at a distance through 2 closed doors the quality of the silence that followed his entrance, the specific silence of a room full of powerful men who had just understood that one of their own was undone. Cooper came out to her at the 4-hour mark. He stood in the doorway of the anteroom and looked at her with the expression he had worn on the night he'd ridden to Ashford Manor in the dark, but different now. Lighter. The expression of a man putting down a weight he had carried for 6 years. "It's holding," he said. "All of it. The grain merchant entry, the land transfers, the witness testimonies. Langley's attorneys asked for a recess and were denied." He paused. "Daniel's testimony was—" He stopped, started again. "He told the truth. All of it. In detail." A pause. "He wept." Charlotte set down her pen. "And Nathaniel. Steady," Cooper said. "The way he's always steady." He looked at her. "He asked me to check on you." "Tell him I'm fine," she said. "Tell him I found 2 carry-forward errors in the supply ledger, and I'll have it corrected before supper." Cooper looked at her for a moment. Then he did something she had not seen from him before he smiled. Not the measuring, evaluating expression he usually wore. A real smile, brief and warm. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and went back in. Victor Langley was arrested at 6:15 in the evening. Charlotte knew the moment it happened because she heard through the walls of the building a sound she had never heard before and could not have described precisely. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the sound of a large room full of people releasing something they had been holding collectively for a very long time. Nathaniel came to her 20 minutes later. He came through the anteroom door and stopped, and she stood up from her chair, and they looked at each other across the small room with the particular clarity of 2 people who have been through the same fire and come out the other side and are now simply quietly looking at each other in the aftermath. "It's done," he said. "I know," she said. "I heard." He crossed the room. She met him halfway. He held her not dramatically, not with the relief of a man who had been drowning. With the steadiness of a man who had won something and knew exactly who he had won it with. "Your name," she said into his shoulder. "Yes," he said. "My name." She pulled back far enough to see his face. "How does it feel?" He thought about it, really thought the way he thought about everything. "Like a ledger that finally balances," he said. She laughed. She couldn't help it. It was the most Nathaniel Ashford answer that had ever existed, and she loved him for it, the way she loved everything about him specifically, clearly without the distance she had kept for the first 3 weeks, without the columns. "Come home," she said. He took her hand. "Yes," he said. "Let's go home." In the months that followed, Ashford Manor changed in ways that were visible and ways that were not. The visible changes came first. The library opened. Men and women who had avoided the Ashford name for 5 years found reason suddenly to reacquaint themselves with it, and Nathaniel received them with the same level courtesy he had always had, neither warm nor cold, simply honest, which turned out to be exactly what people responded to when they had grown accustomed to being managed. Charlotte converted the East Wing into a proper schoolroom. She started with 6 girls, daughters of families in town, who had ability and no access, and by the end of the summer, she had 11. She taught accounts and letters, and the kind of practical mathematics that most women in Virginia in 1816 were never taught on the grounds that not teaching them was a form of keeping them in debt to the men who understood the numbers. Nathaniel watched her build it with the focused attention he gave to everything he cared about. He contributed money without being asked and stayed out of the decisions, which was she told him the most useful thing he could have done. The invisible changes were harder to name. They lived in the small things, in the way he brought her coffee in the morning without being asked. Still 1 spoon of sugar. No cream. In the way she pushed the library door open without knocking, and had not knocked in 8 weeks. In the way they talked in the evenings after supper in the comfortable and slightly worn quiet of 2 people who had stopped performing themselves for each other. One evening in late September, Charlotte found the progress reports. She had known they existed. Nathaniel had told her that first morning that the headmaster sent quarterly reports on the 11 children whose school fees he paid. But she had not seen them before. They were in the open cabinet now, not the locked one filed in a folder, with the kind of care that meant something without announcing it. She sat in the library and read them. All of them. 4 years of quarterly reports on 11 children whose parents didn't know someone had cared enough to pay attention. Nathaniel came in an hour later and found her still there. "You've read them," he said. "Yes." She looked up. James Whitfield, 12 years old. His mathematics teacher says he has an exceptional mind for structure. She held up the report. "That's your handwriting in the margin. You wrote extraordinary and underlined it." Nathaniel sat down across from her. "Yes." "You've never met him?" "No." "But you underlined it," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Someone should," he said. The same thing he had said 5 weeks ago about the $40 and the children's school fees and the winter boots and the church relief fund. The same words. The same flat, honest delivery of a man for whom caring about things was simply what you did quietly without asking to be seen doing it. Charlotte set the report down carefully. "Nathaniel," she said, "I want to tell you something I should have said more directly some time ago." He waited. "I did not fall in love with you because of what you did for those children," she said. "Or because you put a writing desk in my room, or because you chose me specifically, or because you built a case for 5 years while everyone thought you were finished." She held his gaze. "I fell in love with you because when I asked you why you did those things, you said because someone should every time for everything, and you meant it without needing anyone to hear it." She paused. "That is the rarest thing I have ever encountered in a person. And I am not going to stop telling you that it's rare because you need to hear it, and I intend to tell you for a long time." The library was quiet. Nathaniel looked at her with the expression she had finally found a name for 3 weeks ago in the anteroom of the Federal Building when he had come through the door and they had looked at each other in the aftermath of everything. The expression of a man who had stopped expecting good things and had received one anyway and had decided to stop being surprised and simply receive it. "Charlotte," he said, "I have loved you since the morning you walked into my office at 6 o'clock with a grain receipt and told me you'd found the second link." She stared at him. "I know," he said. "It was only 11 days." "It was 11 days," she said. "You found in 11 days what 5 years hadn't found," he said. "And then you sat down and told me what else you needed to look at. And I thought—" He stopped. "I thought this is a person who looks at the truth the way it actually is, not the way she'd prefer it to be. And I had not met anyone like that in so long that I—" He stopped again. "I was very careful for several weeks after that not to feel what I was already feeling." She looked at him. "The writing desk," she said. "You put it there before you'd even met me." "Yes." "So you were all ready before I arrived." "I was hoping," he said simply. "I was trying not to hope because hope had not historically served me well. But yes, I was hoping." Charlotte pressed her lips together, looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. "You are the most careful, most complicated, most genuinely decent man I have ever known," she said. "And I am going to be very useful to you for the rest of your life." He stood, crossed to her, took the stack of progress reports gently from her hands and set them on the desk, and then took her hands instead, the way he had taken them on the porch on the morning the crowd came simply and without ceremony. "I'm counting on it," he said. Outside, the Virginia September had begun turning the oaks along the drive, the same oaks Charlotte had watched through the carriage window on the morning she arrived, telling herself that survival was enough. The schoolroom in the East Wing was quiet at this hour. The girls gone home to their families, the slates cleaned and stacked for the morning. 11 children were sleeping in town in houses where someone had paid attention to them without asking for credit. And in the library of Ashford Manor, 2 people who had been sold and discarded and underestimated, who had found each other in the wreckage of other people's decisions and built something real from it. Column by careful column, stood holding each other's hands in the last of the September light. The most dangerous prison is not a house, a contract, or a marriage. It is a lie that powerful people convince the world to believe. And the bravest thing Charlotte Whitmore had ever done was not the grain receipt, or the hidden floorboard, or the 90 minutes she had spent showing Langley's men ledgers that revealed nothing. The bravest thing she had ever done was stay. Not because she had to, because she chose to. And that choice freely made eyes open columns balanced was the only document that had ever mattered.